Welcome to Hooksett Library's 2022 Candidates Forum, a series that helps connect voters with those running for elected offices in Hooksett. I'm Brittany Overton, the Adult Services Librarian at Hooksett Library. In this video, we talk with Will Lynch, who is running for Budget Committee. Will, thank you for taking the time to share with us your interest in the Budget Committee.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. Let's start by having you tell us a little about yourself and the experiences you've had that you feel would support you on the role of Budget Committee.
Yeah, thanks. So I've been a resident of Hooksett for the past 7 years. I live here with my wife and 2 dogs. For the past 6 years, I've been working to serve the Manchester community, the greater Manchester community, as treasurer of the Manchester Makerspace, which is a nonprofit in downtown Manchester. And we look to give resources, classes to students of all ages, as well as entrepreneurs, to provide them resources for those trade skills and technical skills to start their own business and the like. And specifically, I've been serving on their board as treasurer. So throughout this time, I have a lot of experience in developing budgets. We were a bootstrap organization. We started with literally no cash in the bank. And now 6 years later, we have a nice, healthy profitability, a lot of members. And I think, from all those experiences of all those years and the challenges, including going through COVID, I have a lot to bring to the budget committee here.
Great. What is your opinion of the current municipal budget? Are there areas that you feel need greater consideration?
So from a lot of my understandings about the budgets is there's a lot of points being raised about where to trim without necessarily, moreover, without necessarily being understanding of the consequences of it, right? So trying to find areas of the budget to trim, which makes sense. We want to keep our taxes low, but being smart about how to trim the budget and where to look for the places that we can, save money, perhaps be more efficient, especially. And I think that's one of the gaps in our current process is we look just at some of the dollars and not some of the actual people and community repercussions that we'll have with those cuts, and to make sure that we're making nice, efficient cuts to keep our taxes low, but also to provide the most benefit to our community that we can with the tax dollars we earn.
Great, thank you. This is a two-part question. What approach would you take for reviewing budget requests and drafting municipal and school budgets? And also, how do you see this as being an effective process for budgeting?
Sure. So the budget committee doesn't necessarily draft the budgets themselves. We review them from the school and the town. So making sure that we have a good open communication between the teams that are, debating and drafting these budgets for our review. So back and forth communication with those other committees, with the town council, is very, very important, as well as being open to community input. Making sure that what the community goals are being reflected in, or the larger Hooksett goals rather, are being reflected in what the committees are proposing. And then when we review those, reviewing all the individual committees and reviewing them on kind of a holistic grounds, so that we can, make good recommendations for how to proceed with these individual budgets, so that the overall budget package presented to voters at the end of the year makes sense for their overall goals.
How do you balance the taxpayers' expense with the need for the services?
Yeah, well, a lot of that has to come with most bang for your buck, right? So there are certain services that the government and the town is just flat out better prepared to handle, things like fire rescue, for instance. So making sure that we're well informed about where our taxes are going, so that when we review these expenditures, we can make well-informed decisions about the impacts of these different costs. When we're talking about maintenance for vehicles, for instance, understanding that the future costs of those have to do with the safety of our officers, safety of our roads as well. So making sure that the community is aware of where their money is being spent, making sure that the committees themselves that are drafting these budgets are aware of some of the decisions that they're making when they propose budget cuts or budget extensions, and just in general being well informed and well communicative with those other committees, to make sure that when the final budgets come to the budget committee, that we can have a well-informed discussion as well, to make sure that we're reflecting the goals of what these different committees and town councils have set out to do.
Thank you. And for the final question, what would be your approach to planning for large future expenses, say the replacement of a fire engine?
Yeah, that's a good question. As Hooksett grows, you're going to have a lot of these types of larger, probably multi-year expenses. It becomes difficult in a budget trying to plan for these future expansions. I think it's important to understand when you have these large expenses, to understand that a lot of times they're not just a single large expense, but they sometimes reflect an ongoing expense as well. So for instance, when we purchase a new fire engine, for instance, to also understand what the increased maintenance costs throughout the years are going to be for that, and really looking at not just the very next year when you want to consider one of these large expenses, but a few years down the road. And then, I think I mentioned this earlier, but making sure that if we are going to forgo one of these expenses, to understand the future implications of that. So if we decide, we need an extra engine now, and in 2 years we haven't invested in that, or put aside the budget necessary to invest in that, what is going to be the implication to our fire responsiveness and such. Good communication across the different teams, understanding both the large expense that we're considering, as well as the future costs, and making sure that when we propose the full budget, that we're considering the full package and not just the single line item that may be the large budgetary item.
Great. Thank you, Will. It's been great to hear your thoughts on the budget committee.
Sure. Thanks for having me. This was a really, really nice chat. Thank you.